Okay. I think we're ready to go. Everyone ready?
Ready to go.
Okay, great. Well, welcome everyone. I know we have some folks coming in, and thank you so much as we're working out some technical glitches. Welcome to today's Lunch and Learn. Our website, vcuautism.org, is on the screen. Please, if you haven't visited our website, feel free to. We have lots of information for you. We have all of our Lunch and Learns that we've done since last summer archived on there. So we've got lots of great information there. We also have our courses, our badging system, and just lots of great fact sheets and information for you relating to helping individuals with autism spectrum disorder. So please check that out when you get the opportunity. You can go ahead to the next slide. And just a few housekeeping items. If you have or have not been a part of our Lunch and Learns, we do record these for educational quality control. By participating, you are consenting to being recorded, but no worries. Before we share this, we edit and remove any identifying information to protect your privacy. And we also have a question and answer section that will be removed and only be shared as an anonymous transcript. So whatever you say stays here. And we really would love to hear your questions and comments afterwards. We'll go to the next one. Thank you. So welcome to Distance Learning 2.0, Positive Practices for Students with ASD. I'm Teresa Kogar, and I'm here with my wonderful colleague, Lauren Viteri. And we're going to be talking to you about a tool that, this is the second version of this tool that we've developed just to assist educators and those who work with parents and those who work with individuals with autism spectrum disorder across the state of Virginia. As we go through this, continue to do the virtual model and the hybrid model, we've just continued to work with educators and our folks at ACE across the state just to continue to enhance those practices for our individuals with autism to be the best that they can be in all settings. And so for today's agenda, we're going to talk to you a little bit about why positive practices in distance learning. We're going to review a tool, again, that we've developed, which is the second version, and we feel is the hopefully the most helpful version that we've come up with so far, and just ways to use that tool in your practice, and then some time for discussion, questions, and reflection.
Teresa, can you see the train track slide?
No, I'm seeing the slide where it says positive practices in distance learning.
How about now?
No. And now I see it.
Okay, great. Sorry for the technical difficulties, everyone. Hello, my name is Lauren Viteri. I am a Training and Technical Assistance Associate at VCU ACE. We're so glad you're here. So where do we go? What do we say about distance learning? Wow, we've come such a far way. If you think about 2 years ago, that terminology was used, but not widely. And then the pandemic hit, and it was our primary form of educating students. The virtual platform was really what we used. And crisis teaching kind of happened. Okay, how are we going to teach students, distance-wise? And now crisis teaching has kind of dropped off. We're getting familiar. We're getting comfortable with virtual learning. We're kind of moving into a hybrid or getting back into, into in-person. But we still want to keep moving forward. And I can't help but look at this picture and continue to think about this symbolism of like train tracks merging and everything kind of combining and coming together. So we had two different platforms, two different ways of instruction, in person and virtual. And now when we think of distance learning 2.0, how do we mold them together? How do we merge without derailment? How do we keep moving forward? Because we still have a lot of work to do. And the reality is that we're creating more options for students to be successful. So instead of just having one track or another, what about combining them, and how can we best address students' needs, especially students with disabilities? So learning what we've known, what we've learned, and building them together and creating a perfect option of the two together. So can you see positive practices in distance learning now? Okay, great. So when we think about positive practices in distance learning, positive practices is a pretty broad word, pretty broad umbrella. So what are we talking about when we're saying positive practices? Well, first, we're talking about evidence-based practices. So we're really going to focus on supports that have been proven effective, that work well for students with disabilities and students in general. And we're also going to focus on skill-based treatment. So instead of just punishing or trying to extinguish behavior or challenging behavior, how do we teach the skill? How do we build skill and build knowledge, build capacity with our students? So instead of just punishing hey, let's not hit or rip paper, can we build skills? Can we teach our students how to self-advocate for themselves? How to have functional communication, or even have a way to self-regulate and find replacement and appropriate behavior. So that's when we talk about positive practices. We really want to focus on teaching those skills that are going to be useful as they continue to age and move into the real world. And then we have the basic tenets of this. This is where that positive piece comes of positive practices. Having those basic tenets that all students can learn and all students have strengths. We really want it to be a safe place for students to learn and students to feel comfortable in a distance learning setting. And sometimes that can be difficult, right? Because you're not in the room with them, you're not right there. But creating that warm environment, really building opportunities for students to be engaged and learn, even in a distance learning setting. So why positive practices in distance learning? So why are we focusing on using positive practices in a virtual setting or platform? And I think about the big three. So the kind of the trifecta here. First, it can be generalizable. So we can use positive practices in a variety of environments. We can use it in person, we can use it in hybrid or distance learning. So I think of the evidence-based practice of visual supports. We can use that in a variety of settings. We just have to adapt it to the environment. Or thinking about social skills instruction. It may look a little bit different in a virtual setting, but we can still use that evidence-based practices in a variety of platforms. And then we think about it being individualized. We want it to meet the unique needs of each learner. So each learner is different. We've all heard the quote, if you met one student with autism, you met one student with autism, right? There's such a spectrum. Students in general are very unique learners. We all learn a little bit different. I learn much differently than Teresa does. So we want to be individualized. So thinking about positive practices like reinforcement and prompting. We prompt differently for students, and we prompt differently in person than we do in distance learning, but definitely able to promote effective instruction. And then lastly, why positive practices? Well, they're based in research. We want to focus on interventions that have been proven effective, especially now, and looking back on the pandemic, we realize that time is of the essence. Time is so precious. So we don't want to waste this precious time on interventions that don't work. So we really want to provide our students and families and caregivers with the best strategies, the best coaching tools available for our students. And so our goal, so we're definitely not done yet. We want to continue to deliver quality instruction for our students. And as we're merging those two train tracks, as we're bringing all of what we've learned together and put in person with virtual and hybrid, We always want to keep going. We always want that momentum. We want to constantly create greater goals. And we can do this when we think of distance learning 2.0. Now we're thinking maybe less about, okay, what learning management system am I going to use, or what is Zoom, what is Google Meet? We're moving more away from that, and now we're learning how to coach, how to share our knowledge, how to continue that quality instruction in distance learning or any platform. How do we build resources? How do we build those skills? How do we really make 21st century learners? And that's where we want to go. We want to have these greater goals. And that's why we're going to share a resource with you to really create an infrastructure of how we move forward with distance learning. So now that we're out of crisis teaching and we can really, choose how we're going to use this distance learning, how can we do this? And that infrastructure, we made a checklist for that. So Teresa, do you want to talk about the checklist?
Sure. So why a checklist? And thank you, Lauren, for the wonderful explanation of why we did this. Lauren and I had a passion early on when the pandemic first happened, and we were listening to folks we were working with and doing the research on just really, again, trying to help our folks get through this just as we are. And so again, now that we've gotten through some of this, now we're able to really provide a more in-depth checklist on just improving our practices. So I don't know about you, but I definitely need something like that day to day just to help me keep in check and making sure what I'm doing. And I think it helps our students and our caregivers as well. So why a checklist? It just improves how we work, right? So if we have something that's evidence-based, and like Lauren said, even our checklist, right? The things that are in there are going to be generalizable, not only from the virtual setting, but across settings. And so that's really one of our main ideas in helping produce this checklist, is so that we can help our caregivers who are helping in this virtual setting understand how some of these research-based practices can be generalized across the home as well. Just increasing our own productivity as educators, right? So again, some of us were thrown into us, some of us have more skills than others, but I'm just proud of us as educators in general for pulling up our bootstraps and getting into it and learning from one another on how to do that. And so just increasing our productivity also increases our students' productivity. And so it also helps us reduce errors. Again, for me, virtual learning, those platforms were very new to me, and I had to learn a lot of new skills over this past year, where my wonderful colleague Lauren has a lot of these skills. So I really relied on her to learn a lot of things that we've been working on, and as well as the teachers we're working with. And most teachers are doing a bang-up job of using the virtual platform to implement these evidence-based practices in autism. We just want to keep that going in what we're doing. And I just think the only thing that's not on this checklist that's important, especially to me as a long-time educator, is just to continue to increase our credibility in the field. Again, it's been a whirlwind for many of us, and we want to continue to let those that we serve, our caregivers and others on our team, that hey, we are credible, we know what we're doing, and we can generalize these practices, like Lauren said, whether it's in the virtual setting, the hybrid setting, or both, and we're going to continue to do that. You can go on to the next one. And so what does the remote learning checklist say, or the virtual checklist? And so that's what we're going to talk about in our next section. So again, we have a link, I believe, in the chat if you want to pull this up and follow along. After this training, this will be archived, and the link for this positive practices checklist will be available to you. And eventually we are going to put this on our website as well. So again, please share this with folks in your division or other folks you're working with, and let us know if you have questions. But this is just a glimpse of the checklist to start with. Again, this is 2.0. This is the version of, okay, like Lauren said, now we're past the crisis teaching. So how do we just continue, now that we know our learning management system, now that we know these things, how are we continuing to implement these practices? And so we're going to go through 8 components, and you can go to the next slide, Lauren.
Do you see it? Is it up?
No, no, I don't see it yet. But I think it says, yeah, thank you. The components. So there's 8 evidence-based strategies. Thank you, Lauren, to promote these positive practices. And we did start with training and technical assistance with learning management system. So we're going to talk about some key aspects of that. Collaboration with caregivers, learning environment, again, that virtual classroom and home setting, visual supports, systematic instruction, prompting and reinforcement, social communication instruction, behavior, and so many of these I'm sure are familiar to you. And then we also have 2 other program components. We've put an implementation scale in, and we're going to talk about how you might use that in your divisions or with teachers. And then of course a notes section, because we want as much data and information as we can get. So a notes section really helps with that as well. And so again, just to kind of show you the scoring piece, and again, we can talk about this as a group. Again, this is a coaching tool and a helping tool. So again, we did not create this to be an evaluative tool. That's really, we just wanted to create this to say, hey, are we putting these things in place? And if we're not, then what resources, who do we need to talk to? What do we need to learn from our own professional development to make sure that we are putting these things in place? So you can see the first one says the program struggles to implement this item. The second one, and I'm just going to say them, Lauren, and you can go through the slides if you don't mind. The second one is the program does this item, has this item somewhat, but needs more consistency. And then of course, the last one is the program demonstrates this item consistently. So again, that's really going to be up to you as a coach or a supervisor or a teacher or whoever you are in the division using this tool to really just look at this and just honestly, I think one of the best ways to use this at the beginning is a self-assessment. I know for me, like I said, that learning management system piece was a piece I really had to learn. And even though we are kind of, we say we're past that, we also have to remember we've got new folks coming in that may not be familiar. Folks that, you know, are changing positions or careers. And so again, this just helps them, especially this first section that Lauren's going to talk about, really helps us just remember, again, that checklist sort of thing, right? What do we need to do to eliminate those errors and be as effective as possible in delivering this instruction? You can go to the next one. And then of course we do have scores. And again, for me right now, this is really just looking at, okay, we have 6 in here. And if I have, you know, 2 that I'm doing with consistency and some that need, maybe I have 3 that, you know, that I'm struggling with and 1 that I'm doing really well at, then I'm going to really, this helps me as a teacher know, okay, well, here's the things I really need to work on to be more successful in what I'm doing in this virtual setting.
So let's break down this checklist briefly for you guys. Whether you choose to use the checklist or not, that's completely fine. But there are basic domains for distance learning that are helpful for staff and students. So the first one is the training and technical assistance with learning management system. Teresa, can you see this slide? I just want to make sure I'm gauging that you can see. Okay.
I can see it. You're doing great.
Great. So when you are looking at this first component, this is thinking about the evidence-based practice or the positive practice of antecedent behavioral intervention, so ABI. So this is all about setting your students up for success. So putting all those proactive supports in place first. So this is looking to make sure they have the space, they have the accessibility to instruction, and they have a way to communicate with technology and instructors. So when we're looking at this one, we won't go through each of the items, but we're looking at number 1, staff assist caregivers in developing and maintaining a distraction-free virtual learning space at home. That always continues. Most of our students have that now. We want to make sure there's not really instructional drift. So that's always something that we want to come back to. We always want to look at, say, number 3, always having access to troubleshooting and technical issues as arise. Who are the contacts when there are new platforms in place and we're having difficulty with them. So this is always that setting up and setting for success, setting students up to really be successful. That always continues. And so the main goal of that first domain is that technology support, that accessibility, all those logistical pieces. And as teachers and related service providers or caregivers on the call, we always know those small pieces really make a difference. So all those, you never trip on the pebbles, but those pebbles kind of create rocky roads, right? So you really want to make sure that you're putting all those small pieces in place. You're having a communication, a form of communication, weekly access, to parents and caregivers if necessary, having that accessibility to your online platform. So the next one I would have to say is one of the most essential components, I think, of the checklist. I think one of the most important pieces. Families and caregivers are now more than ever actively a part of their child's instruction and education, sometimes very directly providing instructional supports. So this is a huge piece to continuing, again, distance learning 2.0, how we continue to have effective instruction is that partnership and collaboration with caregivers and families. So this is talking about creating check-ins, having routines, informing caregivers about what prompts work for their child, what reinforcement system is going to be used. So this is actively building relationships and having partnerships with the families and caregivers at home. So I think about number 5, staff instructs caregivers or how to use prompting with their child. It's really important as staff to know, hey, when are we going to really be on top of our student? Or when are we going to back off and let them be independent? Well, we usually prompt more when it's a new skill or a challenging skill. We usually back off as they're becoming successful and independent. So having this communication and collaboration with caregivers, and maybe when we're looking at the checklist, we're doing it well, but maybe we can do it a little bit more. So that's why we have that rating scale and scoring so that we can always work on it and improve and move forward. So when we think about collaboration with caregivers, our focus is on building those partnerships, really being coaches and walking through the instruction and creating a shared vision and goal. Sometimes it's often you feel very distant when you're looking at the computer screen, but if we anchor what we're doing in a shared vision or goal, that's really how we can move forward. So really planning with the end in mind, building up that coaching and support to really provide quality instruction. Then we move into learning environment, and this is really using your surroundings to increase student engagement. So when we think of learning environment, we're thinking about the backgrounds that we have. When I'm instructing, I usually like to have a different background that signifies what lesson or what subject I'm teaching. So maybe if it's social skills, we're going to talk about how, we are safe in a park. How do we build friendships when we're outside? So maybe a park is in the background. Or maybe if we're focusing on science, I have planets in the background. And that's a way to prime or cue what we're going to do. So are we greeting students? Is there engagement activities? There is so many resources out there now that we can really engage students in learning. Students can now have access to places that they maybe have not been able to have access to. Broadway has opened their doors, the Smithsonian, the Australia Zoo. Are there virtual field trips we can take? So it's really setting up that environment to really help students learn and grow. And with that learning environment, you want to pair positive feedback. How do we provide feedback? It can't really be a high five like we used to be able to, but it can be a virtual high five. It can be a thumbs up. It could be a chat praise. And that all makes a positive learning environment and a classroom learning environment. I really like number 4 on this checklist, that talks about staff provides student with more positive feedback than correction. So the recommended ratio is 5-to-1. So are we doing that? Are we aware? So sometimes our students are on mute or they don't have their video on. Are we still checking for understanding? Are we still providing feedback to them as well? So when we think about the learning environment, are we maximizing student engagement, creating a positive classroom? In a last lunch and learn I did, I really talked about having a chilly classroom environment distance learning wise. And we want to avoid that chilly classroom climate. We really want students to run to the computer and pair ourselves well and be excited for instruction instead of not want to, log on and log in. And it's all about setting the stage for that quality instruction. And then visual supports. Visual supports are a foundational 5 practice. It is really one of those foundational practices that really work with a variety of students. So when we think about visual supports, are we using schedules or token boards, or are we using temperature gauges, thermometers? How are we feeling today? Are we overwhelmed? Are we using virtual break cards and reciprocal communication? So having a back and forth. So oftentimes as teachers, we use a lot of visuals about us telling the students what we need to do or how to move forward. Is there visuals for that back and forth? A way to communicate when students are overwhelmed, a way to communicate when they need a break. Having social stories to walk through what virtual learning looks like and continued virtual learning looks like. So when we think of this, it's really visual supports help make abstract concepts a little more concrete and a little bit more manageable. There's a quote: "If you can name it, you can tame it." So if it's a visual about it, especially with emotions, if you can name how you're feeling, you can tame it. So the focus with the visual supports area of this domain and thinking about what to work on in distance learning as we move forward with this type of platform, are we setting clear expectations? There are so many different norms now on a virtual learning setting. So what does the mute button look like? We can't walk our teachers and our classmates through a field trip of our house each day. We can't have the dog come to class with us. And all visuals can help with this. So you can add a visual to support that learning, prime and cue what expectations are going to be required of students. Teresa, do you want to take systematic instruction?
Sure. Thank you, Lauren. So I love how these all build upon each other. And just like when we talk about our foundational 5 A's, it's just an important reminder to remember that just like when Lauren talked about visual supports, we're going to talk about systematic instruction, social communication. So we're going to use, those things are going to overlap. So I think that's to our benefit, especially in using a checklist such as this, is because not all of these are separated. They really do overlap and intertwine with one another. So important thing to remember as we move forward. But systematic instruction, again, the same way we would do systematic instruction in the classroom, we're going to do virtually as well. But like with Lauren said, we're going to think outside the box and use some of those great things that we've learned along the way this year to help promote that instruction forward and really make it engaging for the students. And so, you know, I like the things like the virtual breakout sessions, even in meetings that I've had and trainings that we've done across the state. I think it's pretty cool to be able to transport back and forth in between classrooms, and you can really kind of make that fun for your students. And I'm sure you already have, but making sure to have those breakouts just like you would in a classroom. But again, giving that instruction ahead of time so the student knows when that's going to happen, what are the expectations in that breakout section, and most importantly, hey, when is this going to end? So what I love about some of our learning platforms is they have little timers. So you know when you're going to get ready to get booted, right? So that also helps with that pre-neck of preparing the student. Hey guys, we have 5 minutes left. You could even make it fun, right? Having the countdown. who's my timekeeper? Who's going to help me count down? Those sort of things. And so again, we're not just like, oh, time for breakout rooms, boom. We're making it fun for our students. And honestly, I'm a big proponent of students getting involved in their own learning, as I know Lauren is. Help your students who really know this technology. Let them help you with setting up breakout rooms and how much time you're going to have to give them that choice in their learning. That's part of that systematic instruction. And that leads me to number 4, which is one of my favorites, is providing a choice of activities within sessions. And so part of that also is using those digital choice boards. And so again, this is a great opportunity, especially as we're working with caregivers. What are some of those choices you have at home, right? Can you do that during the 5-minute break? Do you have something next to you, a box full of fidgets or your favorite toy, or maybe your dog does come along for 5 minutes and you pet your dog while maybe that's on your individual choice board. So again, just thinking outside the box and providing those for students and having it right there in the learning platform so they can see it and they can access it. And so I think in the next slide, the focus is creating those norms, as we talked about, for distance learning. Thank you, Lauren. And just be consistent and predictable in routines. And again, that's, I think, one of the biggest takeaways I've gotten from distance learning is that instruction has to be as predictable and consistent as it is in the classroom, probably even more so. And so again, I think that our learning platforms have helped given us some really great structure on how to do that. And again, preparing for generalization. So after I'm done with distance learning, what is instruction going to look like back in the classroom for me? And you know what? It shouldn't really be that much different if we're doing it, right? If we're following these things in the virtual world. So looking for that generalization. And then I think our next one is prompting and reinforcement. And Lauren already alluded to some of this, but again, we just have some specific things for this. Again, using those, Lauren mentioned at the beginning, prompting in person, right, looks different than it does in the virtual world, but we still use those hierarchy of prompts, right? We still use those visual prompts. Lauren mentioned some of those when she talked about visuals. We're still going to gesture, right? I'm still going to hold up my book. I'm still going to hold up whatever I'm teaching them, or I'm going to use some great doc, thing to show my documents. See, these are the folks who know this stuff better than I do, can talk to what that is. But we're going to show those things to our student. We're still going to prompt and we're still going to model, right? Because good teaching is modeling what we want the students to do. And then of course, reinforcing them for doing that. And like Lauren already mentioned, a reinforcement can be a virtual high five, or we're going to use those things that are really important to that student. So again, number 5, I really like, remember to individualize that reinforcement in distance learning. So again, do you have a digital token board, that individual choice board, using that students' communication modality so that they can let you know what reinforces them, what they would like as a choice, what they would like as reinforcement. And of course, social reinforcement continues to be the best way that we can continue to build that intrinsic motivation for our folks and continue to shape the behaviors we want to see. And then for prompting and reinforcement, again, the big focus is to guide the students to the correct responses, right? And again, to build that motivation and just overall encouragement, especially in the virtual world. I think we've had a great opportunity to really encourage our folks to be successful, to use modalities that, quite frankly, a lot of our kids are good at, and give those the opportunities to show their abilities, not only to us, but to caregivers, and really promote some of those skills. And if we do that with prompting and reinforcement, that's really going to help them be very successful, not only in the virtual world, but then again, when they generalize those skills back to the classroom setting. And then social communication instruction. Again, I'm a big one, you've heard me say it a few times, talking about the functional communication of the student. Again, I think this is where when we first started, we were like, well, how do we do this? But we still have their individuals with their AUG-comms device come on the video, and they use their AUG-comms device to communicate to us, and vice versa, right? So like Lauren said, that reciprocal communication still happens via the virtual world. And so again, does that student need pictures? Do they need words? Do they need picture words? Do they need objects? Again, you can still teach that communication instruction using that student's modality, and thinking outside the box on how to do that with these different learning platforms. And then again, right, just regular good old instruction where I'm showing the objects and I'm communicating with the students when I'm teaching, giving that systematic instruction. And one of the, I love all these because communication is a big one for me, but I really like number 6. And I think more than ever, we found that that mental health, that social emotional connection and check-in is really, really important. And like Lauren said, there's great ways to do that with the temperature check, the 5-point scale, just at the beginning, everyone in the class, or if you have an individual session with a student, how are you doing today, right? And you provide a visual support where maybe they click on that, or they tell you, or they use their Ogcom device to be able to communicate that to you. Remember, that's still very important. And then we're teaching the component we know that still many of our individuals with autism need is that regulation of emotion, identifying emotions to be able to communicate socially and be more successful. And so again, it's about creating, maintaining friendships, developing peer relationships, and it's really expanding those social skills. And we've done several lunch and learns about developing peer relationships and how do you continue to build social skills in the social world. And I really believe that that we're doing that for our students. And for some of our students, it's been a platform where they've actually been more comfortable to build and maintain relationships because this is really their platform. This is where they feel most comfortable in front of a screen, communicating with others. So now we've got to take those skills and generalize them back to the classroom. But I think opening that door for them and giving them the opportunity to communicate in a perhaps what they may perceive as a safer environment. I've really seen some real growth in our students, and that's been exciting. And then last but not least is behavior. And again, as Lauren and I like to say sometimes when we do training, we talk about all of the other things because right when we're doing all of the other things, we're right 80 to 95% proactive when we get to this stage. So it's really about implementing those other things. But behavior really is important. I know many students, things have changed for them, right? Since they've had to be in this other environment. We've got caregivers that we're collaborating with on how do I continue to help my students be successful in this setting at home. So, a really important thing to remember is just those proactive strategies, right? To prevent the interfering behaviors. This is number 2. And again, it's about teaching the behavioral expectations. We do that all the time as teachers in the classroom, and it's the same in the virtual world. But now we're also doing some additional work with helping the parents at home on what that looks like. And so we probably did that as teachers to begin with, but now we're in their homes, right? So we're trying to help them on that level. And so again, just continue to use reinforcement, using what works with the family, right? What is happening at home. And if the student does have a behavior plan or crisis plan, remembering that that's got to go across the setting. And how are you working with the caregivers in order to make sure that's successful with those proactive supports. And that really includes all the things we talked about, the social communication, the visual supports, and prompting reinforcement and systematic instruction. So I think for this one, the real focus is really, and I don't see that slide yet. Sorry, I'm a very visual person. I don't see it yet. Oh, there, I see it. Thank you. So thanks, Lauren. So, again, it's about the proactive strategies. It's promoting that safe, functional, appropriate behavior, which again, home is a different environment. So we've had to spend a lot of time on really collaborating with caregivers on what that looks like and helping students, right, be more self-determined, helping them with their own emotional regulation and self-regulation to know that they can do these things across settings. And here's how we're gonna, like Lauren mentioned at the beginning, teach them the skills, right? We're gonna skill build with them, and then we're gonna reinforce that.
So hopefully that was a nice overview of the domains and positive practices, the evidence-based practices we want to continue to use with distance learning. And I just want to really have a shout out to everyone during this time, teachers, caregivers, related service providers, supports, administrators have really done a phenomenal job with trying to have, equitable and quality instruction for students. So I cannot thank you guys enough for everything that you do for students. It really makes a difference. So now for this kind of last section of this, now we have this tool. How do we use it? What do we do? The most important part is the practical piece. So what now? Where do we go from here? And when we think about it, is about how to implement. So if you go to the next slide, ideas for implementation. We can use this as a teacher self-assessment. So the wording of the checklist is for teachers, so staff will, or paras or administrators, all of that. But don't let that limit you. Use it as teams, use it with caregivers, use it with service providers, use it with community members. But ideas for use of where we want to go with this is as that teacher self-assessment tool. Have a pre and post test, pair it with your SMART goals. Where are you at? Really take a deep dive in focusing on these practices and say, hey, what do I do well here? What are some areas of need that I need to work on? And this can carry over as well into an in-person or hybrid setting. So use that tool to kind of guide your goals and where you want to move to. Also think about a coaching tool for teachers or new teachers or teachers who are new to distance learning. Take pieces of this and say, hey, we're going to focus on prompting this week. Oh, when I'm having a coaching session with my autism program teachers, we're going to look at this, or we're going to focus on behavior and how to have behavior be transferable from one setting to another. So use it as a coaching tool to guide, break it up, cut it up. We've had staff who have cut up the checklist into, handheld little check sheets. So feel and use it how you feel is best. Also think about collaborative teams. If you have distant learning teams, review this. Review, hey, as a team, what do we need to focus on? Use it to have, PLCs, personal learning community, professional learning communities. So bring in special education with administrators, with general education, and then focus on this. So use it as a toolbox or build resources based on each of the domains. And have a collaborative tool to assist caregivers in generalizing and promoting practices at home and in the community. So these skills can be used not just for academic setting. How do we really create well-rounded students, well-rounded individuals? And you can use this tool to guide that. So some examples of what we've seen as we've been rolling this out, we definitely have the wonderful opportunity to work with different divisions around the Commonwealth. And so we've had pilot programs, we've had staff use this. So some examples of how divisions have actually used this is to track progress and growth. So we've had teachers use it as a self-assessment, and then behavior specialists or coaches come in and they pair their coaching lessons or coaching topics along these domains and lines, and they individualize it based on student and teacher need. So they track it. They again have that pre and post, say, hey, in August, we were at this number. Hey, in May, here is where we're at now, and look at that growth. Wow. Or what areas that we need to consider to look at. And then also thinking about professional development. So we've definitely had opportunities now with virtual to have really quality professional development, breakout rooms and video chats and all of this really great stuff. So can we tie this into professional development? Can we have discussion groups focused on prompting and reinforcement? Can we have breakout breakout sessions, talking about behavior, how to build functional communication, how to problem solve these different things. So even this checklist was broken down into professional development monthly of what topics were going to be addressed. And then they tailored it to the audience. So if it was administrators, or if it was IT, or if it was special education teachers, general education teachers, collaborative teams, all of that. Teresa, do you have any other examples?
No, that's exactly how we've been rolling it out and using it. And I would concur. I think, a lot of folks have been thankful to have a tool to be able to work around and collaborate with and that's really what it's about as we move through. So thank you, Lauren. Just a few resources for you. One of the things we like to mention is there is a National Professional Development Center on Autism Spectrum Disorder that talks about all of the evidence-based practices that are out there. So if you get a moment, click on that and check that out. Of course, I mentioned our website at ACE, so you have that. And one of the things when Lauren and I first started again this summer, kind of our books that kind of our Bibles for this were these books right here called the Learning Distance Playbook. And that's the very first one that came out. And Corwin, of course, you can get these on Amazon, but the Learning Distance Playbook was written in the middle of when the pandemic first started, and folks went out into the school divisions where it was happening and really realized, hey, there's great checklists and practical information in these. And then of course, now there's one for parents and now there's one for school leaders. So again, this helped guide us too in our development of best practices just in distance learning. And so there's some really great things in there. So education is education. So again, these are just best practices in education, especially during this pandemic, and just something that if you can get your hands on is a great read and great to have something in your library. And then just to close, we just really appreciate your time, and we have a few minutes for questions in just a moment. But again, Lauren's done a really nice job of saying this, we just want to deliver quality instruction and evidence-based practice for students with ASD in all settings. And again, remember, the practices we do in the classroom are the same practices we do virtually. We're just going to find different ways to get there. And what I think is really cool is we can bring these practices back to the classroom, right? And really bring technology back into the classroom to get our students more engaged in their learning. So again, just to continue to build on the skills on the distance learning platform, and perhaps even open more opportunities for our students, especially in the job work world, leisure skills, those social connections. So that is our goal, and we hope that you can use this checklist. We'd love to hear your feedback. And perhaps suggestions, comments. We just want to try to help folks, and we'd love to hear what you're doing.
And really the idea behind the checklist is when talking with divisions and parents and families, there was all of a sudden so many digital platforms and resources and everything out there for distance learning that it was almost overwhelming with how much was out there, but really where to go. So it was all about the idea behind that distance learning 2.0 is refining skills and refining supports and strategies and implementation. So having hundreds of thousands of platforms and where do I go, how many token boards, how many virtual things out there, it was really trying to build an infrastructure, build that backbone of where do we go with distance learning as we continue to figure out distance learning, and it's not going anywhere. So how can we meld it and combine it in what we already know and do really well? So hopefully it really makes it into manageable pieces, and the idea behind it is to have action steps. There's so much going on right now. Everyone is overwhelmed. Break it down into manageable pieces. What can be done? Slow and steady wins the race. Hit a domain or two at first if you're feeling overwhelmed, and then as you're successful, move to the next one and move on. And so hopefully it provides a way to do that and have a way to track progress. And like Teresa said, if there are any thoughts or suggestions, please email us. We'd love your opinion. We'd love to see what you're doing with it. And we'd always like to refine it and make it better.